Indonesian Human Rights League, representing the National Dialogue Quartet, that received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2015, Ms. Kerry Kennedy, President Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Foundation, Mr. Jeffrey Sachs, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on Sustainable Development Goals and Director, Center for Sustainable Development, Earth Institute. We also have the Honorable Minister who's been most patiently waiting here, Mr. Bandaru Dattatreya, Minister of State for Labour, Employment, Government of India. May I request all of you to please take your seats. Welcome back. There's been considerable progress across the world in reducing the vulnerabilities of children, but there's a lot that remains to be done, and that's why we're here today. Rising humanitarian crises are also pushing many children into exploitation. Can we together ensure the rights of all children to freedom, to justice, to equality? That's what we're going to discuss at this plenary session. And I'd now like to hand you over to Mr. Kevin Watkins, who can probably begin this session.
Okay, could I ask everybody to take their seats? We're about to start the afternoon session. Sorry?
Kerry Kennedy.
Can you
It's
take
a
a pen?
Sorry.
So we've got an additional one.
Yeah, Kerry Kennedy.
Who is she?
She's the president of Robert F. Kennedy Center. Human rights. Sorry.
That's good. Okay, so let me start by introducing the session. My name is Kevin Watkins. I'm Chief Executive Officer for Save the Children in the United Kingdom.
Hello.
It's an enormous privilege to be here, and I'd like just to start, if I may, by saying a personal thank you to my very good friend Kailash Satyarthi and his team who have made this event possible. Kailash is not only someone who has achieved amazing things in India, but he's inspired people across the world. And I include myself as one of the people that he has inspired. The founder of my organisation, of Save the Children, Eglantine Jebb, once said, there is only one language that everybody in the world understands, and that language is the cry of a child. And I think there's a very deep truth in that statement. And I think all of us are here today because we've heard the cry of children around the world, and we recognise the need to respond. In one of his introductory leaflets that was given out for this session, Kailash talks about the imperative of keeping alive the hope in children and their freedom to dream, their freedom to choose a better future for themselves. And I think freedom is a very important word in this context. because children who are born into slavery are not free. The 50,000 children that our Indian organization, Save the Children India, estimates to be sleeping on the streets within 5 miles of this venue, these children are not free. The 180 million children around the world who, instead of being in a classroom, are working to put food on the table or to keep their brothers and sisters alive, those children are not free. The Syrian refugee children that we heard about this morning, who have been displaced from their homes, experienced traumatic events in their own lives, and are now out of school, denied the only chance for an education that might enable them to build their future, they are not free. Nelson Mandela once challenged the world to think about children in a different way. And he used a very simple phrase. He said, you have to ask yourself, every government in the world should ask itself, are you doing your best for children? And I think as an international community, we have to hold our hands up and say we're not doing our best. But we're not here at this gathering to wring our hands. We're here to make a difference and to come together and work for change. And I'm absolutely delighted that we've got an amazing panel, all of whom, in their own way and in their own fields, have spent their professional careers working for change and trying to make a difference. I'm going to introduce them one by one, actually, rather than reeling off all 6 names. So, if I may, I'll first call to the podium Gilbert Houngbo, who's Deputy Director General for Field Operations and Partnerships for the International Labour Organization, itself a Nobel Prize winner in 1969. And Gilbert was also former Prime Minister of Togo. So please join me in welcoming him to the podium. Gilbert.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Distinguished delegate. As they say, all protocol observed. In the sake of time, let me try to address you from ILO perspective. First of all, I really have to express again our thanks to Kailash on behalf of the ILO, the whole team in ILO and the Director General. I wanted to maybe come on four major points. The first point, I believe, is worth the while to recall, to remind ourselves that in terms of child labor, which is the dimension that I want to cover from international labor perspective, is the fact that the numbers are dropping, which are positive news. If between 2004 and 2008, we had 7 million less children in child labor, between 2008 and 12, i.e. 4 years later, this number fell by 47 million. And out of that 47 million, 30 million fewer in what we consider the worst form of child labor, and 17 million, which is the fall amongst the children which are too young to be working. That being said, globally, since 2000, ILO estimate indicates a drop in child labor by 1/3. However, that doesn't take away the fact that we're still talking, as of today, about 168 million children in child labor, and out of that, half of them are in worst form of child labor, and 5.5 million are in forced labor. Clearly, agriculture remains by far the most important sector where child laborer can be found. However, However, we need to keep also in mind that the informal sector is also a sector that is really challenging for all of us. So what works in terms of ending child labor? Obviously, we have the Convention on Child Labor and the ILO Convention on the worst form of child labor. The point that I want to stress here is the importance of having an integrated approach. We just cannot look at it from one single dimension. A very simple example, in Bangladesh, we found out that the fact that the garment sector is able to send 80% of the job to women, and the fact that the women empowerment has increased, that itself has increased the rate of attendance to school of the children attendance to school, especially the girls. So the integrated approach is quite an important one. We also have two very concrete examples, one in Ghana and one here in India, which our famous the Convergence Project, which was pioneered here in India. In those two cases, it very clearly demonstrated that we really need to proceed with an integration of different sectors, different dimensions of the puzzle. Let me finish by just take 1 minute and talk about the Alliance 8.7. I mentioned that this morning to some of the colleagues, where together with a lot of the international development system, including UNICEF, UNODC in Vienna, etc., we launched in September during the General Assembly the Alliance 8.7, which is the SDG 8.7, talking about eradication of the world form of child labor by 2025 and the whole child labor by 2030. So it's a call for all of you to be able to join us on this. And in moving forward, the importance for us to also, I was talking about the informal sector, but within that informal sector, the family setting of enterprises is also a domain that we believe by tackling it from a different angle will help. Final point is the social safety net, the social protection schemes. The more we also work on those, it automatically has a direct and positive impact on the ultimate objective. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. And also thank you for keeping so scrupulously to the time allocation. I'd like now to call Minister of State Bandaru Dattaraya, who's Minister for Labour and Employment here in India.
So my name is Bandaru Dattatreya, and I am Minister for Labour and Employment in the Government of India. I thank our Nobel Laureate, Sri Kailash Satyarthi. He has made this global platform for the first time in India, for particularly this summit. This is going to be really a historic one. This is for Children's Summit for 2016. And I welcome all the delegates and also the Nobel laureates and different delegates from the different countries. And once again, I express my thanks to the Sri Kailash Satyarthi inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. Once again, I express my gratitude to our Nobel laureate, Sri Kailash Satyarthi, because The global summit itself indicates that the importance of the child labor, which given by Nobel Satyarthiji in India, is historical one. That's why I thanks our Nobel laureate Sri Satyarthiji for doing a big, tremendous job in India, which is prevalence of child labor. And I am also happy to panel for this discussion. And the very important aspect is I will put forth what are the initiatives which the Government of India has taken, and many initiatives which we have taken, I wanted to put forth in a small brief note. Friends, really, children are invaluable asset of our country who needs to be nurtured properly for the better future of the country. And yet there are millions deprived children in our country. We have never known a normal, carefree childhood education of child. Labor is priority for our government and committed to address the issue considering the magnitude of the nature. For this, we have taken multi-pronged action. In this, we have taken in this multi-pronged action the convergence of the many initiatives that we have taken up. And this problem now is a historical move by our government completely banning child labor in the country for children below 14 years. And we have come out with a new definition, that is for 14 to 18 years as adolescent. Adolescent which totally ban or prohibit in hazardous occupations and processes by way of enactment of a Child Labor Prohibition and Regulation Amendment Act in 2016, 19/2016. This was just a first step towards a society free of child labor, as without wasting a day, we constituted a technical advisory committee, and the same day, 19/2016, in order to address the misunderstandings and concerns of the people, further a committee also constituted to frame the rules to ensure the effective enforcement of this act. Friends, I am happy to inform that this first draft of the Child Labor and Adolescent Amendment Rules is ready and also being placed in the website. While formulating the rules, a broad consultative process was followed involving representatives of the ministries, state governments, academicians, and civil society. While formulating the draft rules, special care was taken to incorporate the following provisions. The first provision is a separate list of hazardous occupations and processes where adolescents and children cannot be employed, and another list of certain occupations and processes in the schedule. That means schedule will be in the A and B form, and in the A form where the adolescent child will not work under the hazardous areas. The age group limited is 14 to 18, and in which now where the separate list will be provided for the hazardous areas. And in the part B, in the schedule, part B will be particularly for the age of 14 years. There will be a totally ban, and this totally banned because the below 14 years cannot work any establishments and will not only help for the family. That also we have restricted the definition of the family, and that too in restricted the family. That too we have taken a very broad view that even in the family, in hazardous areas, he cannot work. And other thing is, even for in the family, he helps, only he helps, not having up any of the employment association. And other important aspect is, with only he can help after school hours and in vacations. Even school hours also, after only 2 to 3 hours only, he can work. Apart from that, he cannot work. That's why we have restricted, even in the family, these things. And the friends, other important aspect is that they provide this definition. This definition help the clarification regarding the family. I have included only real brother and sister of the parents and child, and providing clarification that child can help only in the family enterprises owned by the family of the child. For the first time, rules incorporates provision for prevention, rescue and rehabilitation and convergence of other protective legislations and rehabilitative measures provided in the scheme of other ministries. I would like to add that we have also amended the bonded labor scheme and enhanced rehabilitation amount for each child rescued from the trafficking and sexual exploitation from 20,000 to 3 lakh rupees. Further, I feel if the provisions of Child and Adolescent Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act are effectively implemented, we would be able to reduce trafficking of children also, as it will reduce demand of child works. With this, once again, I express my thanks to the Bachpan Bachao Andolan organizers and particularly our Kailash Satyarthi ji, who invited me to participate in this plenary session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister, for that. Actually, the Minister, I believe, has to leave now for a visit, but very many thanks to you. Can I now ask Dr. Helen Durham, who is the Director of International Law and Policy at the International Committee of the Red Cross. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your many excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear committed colleagues, the International Committee of the Red Cross is extremely grateful for the opportunity to address you today and to be part of this very necessary summit. As an institution that for over 150 years has been deeply committed to assist people and those made vulnerable by armed conflict, we of course are committed to the process and the outcomes of this summit. Now, sadly, we in the ICRC across the globe daily witness the heartbreaking realities of the impact of conflict upon children. Many of the experiences are too horrific to mention in detail, but too necessary to not acknowledge. Children, when they're direct or indirect victims of conflict, when they suffer due to the breakdown of essential services, be that the food, sanitation, education and health. When children, in our experiences during times of armed conflict, often experience being separated from their families, and often they are forced or have no other option but to bear arms and actually engage in conflict itself. But I think all of us, if we only stop at the suffering of children in the particular areas we're looking at, we're only telling half the story. In our experience, it's really important not to forget children's agency, their capacity to be resilient, their capacity to have tenacity. And I myself are often overwhelmed when I visit young children, particularly that are working with our prothesis centres in places such as Iraq, children who have lost limbs due to landmine or other unexploded ordnance, to see their tenacity and their capacity to get up and keep going. So I think we always need to acknowledge that issue when we look at how to move forward. Now, I know we only had 4 minutes, I see here, to address some issues, so I will actually leave my speech aside and perhaps deal with a couple of issues that we can engage with as we have our panel discussion. The ICRC is increasingly seeing 3 trends with armed conflict across the globe. We're seeing that conflict is becoming more protracted, it's becoming more urbanised, and it's becoming more fragmented in the sense of the increasing number of non-state armed groups and others engaged in conflict. Now, what does that mean for children? Well, in our experiences, the issue of the protraction of conflict, traditionally ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross, would go into a country and leave. We've estimated now that the average time in the 10 top delegations where we are located is 36 years. We need to, as an organisation dealing with emergencies, and as many of you in the room dealing with situations like that, we need to really look at issues other than life-saving measures, and we are increasingly focusing on the issue of education. If conflict is protracted, education is a critical issue. What does it mean about the increased conflict being fought in urbanised areas? Well, often we only understand or are impacted by the stories of children directly affected by conflict, their direct attacks. But in our experience, the destruction of hospitals, the targeting of water sanitation facilities, the use of schools for non-civilian activities in highly densely populated areas is absolutely critical and is having a huge impact upon children globally. And thirdly, the issue of the fragmentation of parties. Just as a story, our colleague who is heading the delegation in Syria, to be able to do cross-line deliveries of assistance often has to negotiate with up to 30 non-state armed groups. So that has obviously an impact about how much assistance you can deliver. And I think that's where you see children that can be trafficked, children's bodies being used to raise money for warring parties, and the issue of recruitment of child soldiers. So in those 3 areas, we really need to look at children. Now, I noticed in the instructions for this session, we wanted to look at tangible and innovative outcomes.
Sorry, 2 minutes.
2 minutes ago, thank you. I haven't got my spectacles on. Can I read? And I think when we look at issues of tangible and innovative outcomes, it is important. Some of the things that we're doing globally and that need to be thought about is the use of technology. We're doing more video games, for example, where there's the laws of war as a part of these video games. How can we get children to think about armed conflict in a different way? But if I may be a little controversial for a moment, I think we need to be innovative, but I think we constantly need to go back to basics. If we're talking about issues of protection, we need to look at matters such as the responsibility of warring parties to follow the conduct of hostilities, not to attack hospitals, not to attack schools. We need to look at the necessity and the role that groups like the Red Cross play in tracing families that are separated, the obligations that warring parties have in relation to the fate of the missing. We need to look at pre-conflict and post-conflict prevention, and we also need to look at ending impunity. I just wanted to finish in relation to the issue of the missing. We have found globally that the need to put families back together during times of conflict, often families flee or are dispersed during times of conflict, is really, really critical. And in that role, the tracing messages that we provide across the globe, I think, are very important for many children. I just wanted to quickly read the experiences of one girl, a Somali refugee. Her name was Yuka. And when we re-established her family through the tracing service, and she was based in Yemen, hearing her mother's voice after 2 years of not hearing her at all made her want to make time stop, she said, and wanted to live in that moment forever, and was then able to get on and have a life. So I think we need to be innovative, but we also need to go back to basics and ensure dignity and protection for all, but particularly children, during times of armed conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. I'd like to introduce now Najet Zamouri, who's Vice President of the Tunisian Human Rights League. Najet is actually going to deliver her remarks in French, and so for those of you who want to listen in English, it's channel 1 on the headphones.
Thank you, Mr. the President, for saving the time to tell it myself. Okay. Merci pour mon frère Kailash, déjà. Merci pour le Président de nous avoir reçus si gentiment aujourd'hui. Merci à, à tout le public. Hier soir, j'ai rencontré des gens extraordinaires qui viennent des 4 coins du monde. Nous étions assis autour de la même table et malgré nos divergences sociales, culturelles et religieuses, nous avons trouvé un sujet commun qui nous tient beaucoup à cœur et qui avait le mérite de nous rapprocher et d'effacer tous ces obstacles qui nous séparaient. Ce sujet est d'une importance primordiale, vu qu'il touche une catégorie très fragile de la société. C'est l'exploitation des enfants. En 1989, le monde a enfin vu que les enfants ont besoin d'une convention qui protège leurs propres droits, puisque les enfants au-dessous de 18 ans ont besoin d'adultes qui prennent leur défense contre toute atteinte qui porte préjudice à leur dignité. Avec ces 54 articles, cette convention a été enfin adoptée par la majorité du pays du monde. Elle stipule que les enfants détiennent des droits fondamentaux partout et sans discrimination aucune, ni sur la base de la couleur, ni la religion, ni le sexe, mais le droit à l'éducation, le droit à l'accès à la santé, aux services sociaux, civiques et juridiques. Or, de nos jours, les atteintes à la dignité de l'enfant se poursuivent. Et aucun continent, aucun pays n'est épargné de ces préjudices. Quand il y a encore plus de 250 000 enfants qui travaillent dans le monde et dont plus de 150 millions qui travaillent dans des conditions très dangereuses, c'est qu'il y a quelque chose qui ne va pas. D'autant plus que 1 million de ces enfants sont victimes de trafic humain chaque année. Nous savons tous que la place de l'enfant au-dessous de 18 ans est à l'école ou bien au parc de jeux. Mais nous constatons que le nombre des enfants qui travaillent ne cesse d'augmenter. Pourtant, le travail prive l'enfant de sa liberté, qui est l'un des droits fondamentaux mentionnés dans la Convention. Et tout travail exercé par un enfant porte automatiquement atteinte à sa dignité physique, morale ou psychique, car l'enfant est un ouvrier non spécialisé qui accepte toute tâche et tous les salaires proposés. En Tunisie, et grâce à un réel travail de pression et de plaidoyer de la société civile, nous avons instauré des lois avant-gardistes qui protègent l'enfant des rues en rendant la scolarité obligatoire jusqu'à 16 ans, en pénalisant même les parents qui obligent leurs enfants à quitter l'école, en donnant le droit à l'enfant de porter plainte contre son agresseur. Mais l'état des enfants s'est malheureusement détérioré après la révolution de Jasmin de 2011. En effet, après des statistiques officielles, plus de 5 000 sont dans la rue, alors que d'autres sources non officielles disent que les chiffres peuvent atteindre jusqu'à 8 000, dont 3 000 sont répandus à la capitale. Parmi ces enfants de la rue, 70% touchent à la drogue, dont 40% sont dépendants et 50% consomment l'alcool. Sans oublier que ces enfants sont souvent sujets à l'harcèlement sexuel et au viol. À ce problème s'ajoute un nouveau phénomène social que la Tunisie commence à découvrir après la révolution du Jasmin, à savoir le suicide des enfants. Oui, en effet, nous avons enregistré 50 cas de suicide chez les enfants au-dessous de 15 ans, rien qu'en 2015. Et 549 cas de suicide et de tentatives de suicide à la même année. Toutes ces victimes viennent de milieux sociaux pauvres et à l'intérieur du pays. Parce que lors de la Révolution, après la Révolution, nous nous sommes peut-être préoccupés des libertés individuelles et des libertés publiques, à savoir l'expression, la liberté d'expression, la liberté de la presse, et nous avons peut-être négligé nos enfants. Aujourd'hui, et notamment après l'obtention du prix Nobel de la paix en 2015, la Ligue tunisienne des droits de l'homme ressent doublement la responsabilité envers la société tunisienne et bien spécialement envers nos enfants. Et tant que nous n'avons pas trouvé une solution après ce sommet, ce prix va nous peser très lourd, je vous assure. Nous devons mettre en œuvre un plan d'action sur tous les niveaux, et notamment le niveau éducatif et juridique, avec nos partenaires nationaux, mais aussi avec toute organisation internationale qui œuvre pour le même objectif. Alors, œuvrons ensemble pour une enfance heureuse, pour des générations futures instruites, éduquées. Les enfants oppressés nous attendent à l'extérieur. Le monde entier nous attend. Et merci beaucoup.
Najib, thank you so much for that. So I'd like to pass now to Jeffrey Sachs, who's a special advisor to the UN Secretary General on the Sustainable Development Goals. Jeff also played a really central role in framing the Millennium Development Goals, and I think has done as much as anybody internationally to link the child rights issues that we're talking about here to the global international development agenda. So, Jeff, over to you.
Thank you very much, Kailash. Thank you for bringing us together. Our goal is to end child labor, child trafficking, and modern slavery. And I want to emphasize to everybody that the world's governments have adopted these goals. This is a matter of implementation right now. Please remember that in the new Agenda 2030, which every government in the world is responsible for, Target 8.7 says, take immediate and effective measures to eradicate forced labor, end modern slavery and human trafficking, and secure the prohibition and the elimination of the worst forms of child labor, including the recruitment and use of child soldiers, and by 2025, end child labor in all its forms. This is the international policy. We are obligated to come up with practical approaches to achieve the goals, not to convince on the goals, but now to achieve the goals. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals generally, I just counted, the word child appears 13 times in the SDGs, if I counted correctly, and 25 times in the 2030 Agenda, meaning that this is a child-oriented global agreement. I believe that our opportunity, therefore, is to be specific on plans. And I would like to propose 8 points that I think should be part of such a global strategy. The first is a global social movement oriented around what has been agreed. We have a powerful platform, and your movement and the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, and world religious leaders, and many, many Save the Children, and many organizations can embrace these globally agreed goals as the center point for a social movement. Second, I believe that this movement should propose model legislation in each country. It should propose that every country review its existing laws and demand that they become consistent with these global goals. That will be the case already in many countries, but in dozens of countries it is not the case. Third, community support functions. Clearly, as we've heard from experts throughout this room that are dealing with this challenge, all through India, for example, there is an urgent need for support at the community level of impoverished families, mothers who are getting tricked by traffickers, deception, illegality, social support. It doesn't exist, so creating the community support functions. Fourth is enforcement processes, and we're in the room with the world's expert on how to actually break these criminal gangs. And so, Kailash, we depend on you and need to be guided by you on the mechanisms for actually breaking this and teaching your lessons all over the world, because this is a problem in dozens and dozens of countries. Next is global supply chains. The biggest brand names in the world are already vulnerable to the charges that they have child labor in their supply chains, but they need to be champions of this. And I can name 20 CEOs that need to be front and center, from the food industry, from the apparel industry, fashions, and many industries where their supply chains are implicated, and they need to take a responsibility as some of the most powerful organizations in the world. Next is metrics. We do not have data that are adequate for holding governments accountable right now. When my organization at the UN tried to produce metrics on modern slavery, we hit a wall that there were no reliable metrics globally. We wanted to put this into global indexes so that we could hold governments accountable year to year. And we were told, don't put in any numbers, you'll get too criticized. Well, we seriously need to develop the metrics. My seventh point is we need a global fund for education. Without this, dozens of poor countries will not be able to afford SDG 4. This requires an incremental $40 billion a year. But if you gasp at that number, as a macroeconomist, I can tell you it's a rounding error, because the world economy is $120 trillion, because the Pentagon budget is $3 billion a day. So if you want to come up with the money, it's not hard, if governments really want to come up with the funding. And if it's not governments, we know that there is plenty of private wealth. Just the billionaires alone have about $8 trillion of net worth. 8 trillion. That's enough to solve these problems, just a tiny fraction of that. And finally, we need to emphasize, as the Dalai Lama did in his opening, that the crises are dramatically aggravated by war, and these are wars of choice that we're facing. My country, the United States, has instigated several of these wars in recent times, probably been the most militarized country in the world. Wars in Syria, in Libya, in Iraq, and this is where your refugee crises are pouring in. So we have to make the point that this is accountability, and this is a key point. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I believe the targets are there, the goals have been set, the global commitment is there, but we need now specifics, financing, and accountability. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you so much for that. I'd like now to pass on to our last speaker, who's Kiroy Kennedy from the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Center.
Good afternoon. I'd like to start with this quote from Robert F. Kennedy. He said it 50 years ago, and I just think it's so appropriate. for this conference. He said, our answer is the world's hope. It is to rely on youth. The world demands the qualities of youth, not a time of life, but a state of mind, a temper of the will, a quality of the imagination, a predominance of courage over timidity, of the appetite for adventure over the love of ease. So that's what I think this conference in many ways is all about. I want to focus, as we've heard so many different people speak, I want to focus just for a few minutes on education. And as the High Commissioner for Human Rights said, we need education, but we're not going to stop with just education, because we need specifically human rights education. Education alone is not enough. Of the 16 people who planned the Holocaust, 8 of them had master's degrees or more. So we need specifically human rights education. We need students to know how to use human rights protocols to protect themselves and assert their rights. And we need to teach them that through human rights by getting them involved. So that's one of the things that Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights does. We teach about 1 million students per year, kindergarten through law school, human rights education. So do you want to hear an example? Okay, this is an example because I'm involving you in the discussion. All right? So one of the areas that we teach, and this is inspired by Kailash Satyarthi, and we have a whole chapter just on Kailash, is in the manufacture of chocolate. So when kids are about 12 years old anywhere in the world, they have what's called language arts, and they have to learn how to write poetry. So we give them 2 or 3 articles about children manufacturing chocolate. About 70% of the chocolate consumed in the United States and in the European Union is made by children in child labor and slavery. So we give them 2 or 3 articles on that, and then they have to write a poem in iambic pentameter about what it's like to be a child in slavery making chocolate. Okay, so they learn text analysis, they learn empathy, and they learn about poetry, iambic pentameter. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is expository writing. So we give them the same articles, and now they have to take those articles and write a letter. We give them the name and address of the CEO of Hershey's and Mars and Godiva. And they have to write a letter saying, here's the problem, what are you doing about it? So that's also another skill set, because it's teaching them to take something that was emotional and make it into an advocacy tool. And then the third happens around Halloween, and we give them a 4x6 piece of the index card, and they have to write the problem in 1 sentence. And they have to say there's a solution. And then they scotch tape a piece of fair trade chocolate to the card. And whenever somebody gives them a piece of chocolate, they hand back the card and say, please take this. And at the end of those 3 exercises, those kids self-identify as human rights defenders. And then they see the world through the eyes of defenders. And that's the type of work that we do. So, would you all like to participate in one of the programs? That's the right answer. Okay, I'm going to need your help, and I'd like a microphone. Can I have a microphone? Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So, what we're going to do is 60% of the children in child labor are in the agriculture fields. And one of the hardest things they have to do is go and fetch water. So all around the world, kids are praying for rain. Okay? So we're going to join them in a call for rain. Are you ready for that? Okay, great. So we have to practice. The first thing we're going to do is snap our fingers. Okay, you're very good at that. The next thing is just clap your hands a little bit like this. Okay, great. Then you're going to slap like that. And then stomp your feet. Okay, you guys are not good foot stompers. Try this. Oh, you're much better at that. That's going to be the last thing. Okay, we're going to divide the room into 3 parts. So these first 2 lines of tables, you're the first part, okay? And then you're the second part right here in the middle. And then you guys are the third part, both of these sets of tables. You all please participate with Kailash's table, okay? Now, this is very, very important. You're going to see what another part of the room is doing. Don't do it. Stick to your part, or this won't work. Okay, you got it? Okay, everybody stand up. Everybody, I see you guys sitting down. Stand up. Okay, are you ready? I got to hear back from you. You ready? Yeah. Okay, good, good. Now we're going to start. Now I'm going to put down this microphone, so you have to follow me.
Okay, so for our next trick, we're going to do country and western dancing. No, that's a joke. Thank you, Kerry, for that. That was fantastic. So I'm getting very nervous glances from different quarters. So unfortunately, we don't have time for the discussion, and we have to wrap up in the next few minutes. And I'm not going to try and summarize what our speakers have said. I think each of them gave absolutely fantastic presentations. But maybe just to pull out some of the main themes that came out and offer a couple of reflections. So we heard from Gilbert that there is an agenda that the International Labour Organization is leading. And I think it's really important that all of the UN agencies and all of us in this room get behind the ILO, and the ILO works with others to actually deliver on this, because I think we don't need to reinvent the principles and the frameworks that both Jeff and Gilbert set out. So thank you for that, Gilbert. We heard from the Minister about some of the changes that have been introduced in India. Unfortunately, the Minister has had to leave, but he does have other colleagues here. And I would say there are so many areas in which India is an emerging global leader. It's an emerging global leader in software. It's an emerging global leader in economic growth. How about becoming the global leader in the eradication of child labour, child trafficking and slavery? I think that would be an accomplishment worth so much. There's another quote from J.F. Kennedy where he commented that we're brilliant at measuring the things that don't matter. He was actually using economic growth in that. Robert Kennedy, I'm sorry. That we're brilliant at measuring many of the things that don't matter, or measuring the things that can sometimes cause damage. But what about if you look behind the growth numbers at the children who are being left behind, we need to get better at measuring that. And I think that's one of the issues that Jeff was making in relation to our data gaps. Helen spoke really powerfully about the importance of actually enforcing many of the laws and the principles that the ICRC and others stand for. That there should be no impunity for people who attack children. That's a very basic principle, but we've somehow allowed that principle to get eroded over time, and we need to restore it. Najet spoke passionately about the importance of remembering the children from the poorest sections of society and the role of legal provisions and education in advancing their cause. Jeff set out the case, I thought brilliantly, for, we have the Sustainable Development Goals. What we currently don't have is the global movements and the coalitions that can actually make them happen. And I think this type of meeting is an opportunity to address that gap. And Jeff also set out some of the big challenges on global supply chains that can be addressed. I think his comments on education have a very special relevance, and it's great that we have Julia Gillard here from the Global Partnership for Education, which is one of the great multilateral mechanisms for delivering on education. But if you look at the countries that have successfully eradicated child labour, education has been an absolutely critical part of that. In the United Kingdom, it wasn't just the Factory Act that got kids out of factories, it was compulsory education. So this is one of the vehicles through which we can get children out of labour markets and back into school. And actually the last session, I think, is fresh in your minds and speaks for itself, so I'm not going to try and do a repeat or summary of the rain dance. I just want to end with one thought. I think if all of us in this room were honest, we would say we're really daunted by the sheer scale and the magnitude of the challenge that we're trying to address. These are challenges that are rooted in deep imbalances in power, in public attitudes, in the failure of governments to stand up for their most deprived and most vulnerable citizens. And we're trying to do it, let's face it, in a very difficult global political environment, an environment in which many of the principles of multilateralism and cooperation that we all believe in are being eroded, where political leaders are getting elected on the basis of platforms that reflect attitudes that all of us abhor. And so our challenge is absolutely enormous. When I get daunted by things, I often go back to a book that I read a while ago called Break the Chains by Adam Hochschild. And it's the story of the group that came together in a small room in London in the 1780s to eradicate slavery. And at that time, slavery was a big global business. All of the major powers were involved in it, in advancing it. There was no mass movement to eradicate it. But these guys, 6 people, doggedly over the next 25 years worked absolutely relentlessly to introduce the legislation that did abolish child slavery, that abolished slavery. And they did it by engaging with former slaves, but above all, they did it by bringing together coalitions that could make a difference. The business community, the faith community, the church community, artisan communities. And I think that combination of having a great cause, an unshakable conviction that change is possible, which is something we've learned from Kailash and his colleagues, and a willingness to think outside of the silos and boxes, which, let's face it, we all operate in sometimes, to forge the coalitions that can really achieve change. I think we don't have the luxury of arguing between ourselves. We don't have the luxury of complacency. We can't afford to divide our cause or to set the bar of ambition too low. This awful stuff, children working down coal mines, children being trafficked, children being left by some of the richest countries in the world to drown in the Mediterranean. This is happening on our watch, and we need to end it on our watch. And I think this meeting is a start, I hope, of the beginning of the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kevin Watkins, for handling that session so admirably, sticking to the time, and we really appreciate your controlling the group. Sincere apologies for cutting down on everyone's time. We would have liked to have a discussion, but because of matters beyond our control, we've had to go straight on to the next plenary session. Ladies and gentlemen, there will be no tea break. Tea and coffee will be served on your tables. We begin Plenary 2, which is a session focused. May I request all our dignitaries to take their seats in the audience so we can have our guests for the second plenary, which is focused on how overall childhood well-being and development, particularly education and health, is imperative today. What are the challenges and opportunities for ensuring access to good quality education and healthcare to the most vulnerable children? That is the question we're asking. I have great pleasure in inviting to the dais the moderator for this session, Mr. N. Ram, who's the chairman, Kasturi and Sons Limited, and publisher of The Hindu. Ladies and gentlemen, big hand for Mr. N. Ram. Our other honored panelists, Her Excellency Julia Gillard, former Prime Minister of Australia. Madam Tavakol Karman, Nobel Peace Laureate. Dr. Unnikrishnan Karunakara, former International President, Médecins Sans Frontières, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1999. Mr. Ratan Kumar Nag,